Hey guys, I'm gonna cover some coffee stuff, and I'm gonna do that. Let me turn this TV down. Okay, you want to try to cover all things coffee. Um, I've been sitting here for about 2 hours just kind of looking stuff up, and I think it's important that we talk about it, and I'll let you guys know my thoughts on the pros, the cons, what I've been seeing, how social media promotes um, bulletproof coffee, fat coffee, collagen coffee, all these other things, and we'll go from there. So, um, the layout of what this is going to be is the reasons for bulletproof coffee. I'm going to touch on transition to keto, appetite control, brain neurological function, filtered coffee, unfiltered coffee, cold brew. I'm going to touch on the science behind filtered versus unfiltered. We're going to talk about cafestol, the terpenoid molecule that's in coffee, heteroatoms, the biological and pharmacological effect on how it affects you, and just kind of tie everything up at the end of this with my thoughts on it. First, I want to start out by saying that I am a proponent for bulletproof coffee, but I'm going to talk to you very honestly and open about this. You're probably going to hear me say things that the rest of the keto community won't say, or the medical professionals won't say. I get myself in trouble often because I won't fit the criteria of the keto standard. I will not bow down to it because Dr. Berry said so, or Dr. John Lemansky said so, or Thomas DeLauer said so. I find holes in all that stuff. I find that there's a pro and that there's a con to everything. I find that there's a good and there's a bad to everything. And I find a lot of our professionals that openly speak about these things, they don't want to talk about the cons because they don't necessarily want to take credit away from the ketogenic diet. Keto is by far the most superior healing diet without eliminating everything. The utmost number one healing diet, I would have to say, is carnivore, because now we're heavily tapping into the autoimmune conditions, where keto doesn't get as deep into the autoimmune conditions as carnivore does, because now you've eliminated everything. And when I say that keto is the number one diet for healing, is because you're still having some of those other things that you may have grew up on. You're still having the vegetables and stuff like that that some people can handle. There's absolutely no science that says that we need fiber and stuff like that. There's nothing proven that says that we have to have vegetables in our diet. That's just a fact. We can get that from nose to tail from an animal. But anyway, I talk about things from all different perspectives. And that's one of the reasons why you see my subscriber rating not climbing as much as everybody else. I'm not promoting bulletproof coffee. I'm not promoting keto bars. I'm not promoting treats. I'm not promoting all this other junk you see a lot of other people promote, because I don't find that's important for me to promote. But I want you to hear it from me. So, reasons for bulletproof coffee. When you're transitioning into keto, this air conditioner's on right now, and I'm about to throw something at it because it seems like every time, good morning, it seems like every time I go live, I've got to turn the TV down. I thought I prepped for everything, but I guess I didn't. Anyway, let's go over here and shut this thing off real quick. So you guys, I don't know if you guys can hear it or not, but I don't want it on while I'm talking because it's going to throw me off. Let's see here. And I do apologize. That was kind of unprofessional, and I should have taken care of that ahead of time. I normally try to catch that stuff. So, reasons for bulletproof coffee. The transition to keto into a fat-adapted state, it's very critical. For you to lose most of those cravings in the beginning, and to get to a point in your journey that you're starting to step away from those sugar and those carb cravings that end up leading you into another carb meal, another carb meal, another carb meal, and a constant hunger hours and hours later. Keto coffee can be a huge benefit. But was it originally promoted back in the 1980 when Dr. Eric Westman started talking about this? Was it promoted through the 80s into the 90s? It wasn't promoted until recently. What is the science? What is the actual reasoning behind bulletproof coffee? Well, Mr. Asprey himself was hiking in Tibet, and he noticed the Tibetans were consuming tea with butter in it, and it was yak butter. The reason for that was not because it was healing. The reason for that was not because it had some kind of superpower and some kind of health benefit to it. It was simply because they were trying to sustain a level of caloric intake to actually keep their energy levels up while they were out working in the frigid temperatures. And this was not something that was consumed all the time. This is something that's consumed while you're out working in extreme temperatures. You need calories right away, and we know fat has 9 grams or not 9 calories per gram of fat. So the Tibetans knew that if I'm going to be out here, I can't sustain eating food and stuff while I'm out here, but I do have to have some kind of caloric intake while I'm out here. So if I put this butter in my tea, not only is it warming me up, it's giving me my caloric intake that I need, and I can sustain working outside for longer periods of time. Well, Dave Asprey, being the entrepreneur that he is, saw it as a marketing tool. He was a businessman. He had, at this point in time, been working with multiple companies, successful, being a, I don't know, multi-millionaire or something like that. And he saw it as an opportunity to bring it back to the United States. It's a good thing that he did, don't get me wrong, because a lot of people have used it to heal and a benefit to their journey. But that's not what it was brought here for. It was brought here because he's seen somebody else doing it. He's not a doctor, he's not a scientist, he's not a nutritionist. He saw somebody else doing it, so he adapted it and used it and brought it back to the United States and coined bulletproof coffee. Now, his bulletproof coffee is upwards of like 500 to 600 calorie bulletproof coffee. And all these other people tried to adapt that as well, which I think is quite ridiculous, to be honest with you. When you're drinking 600 calories of bulletproof coffee, that's absurd to me. Um, I can't even I can't even wrap my mind around putting 2 tablespoons of butter, 2 tablespoons of coconut oil, 2 tablespoons of MCT oil, adding all this stuff in there, and then saying I'm going to drink 600 calories worth of liquid source dietary fat. Dr. Eric Westman is one of the original guys that created this back when this came out. So the keto diet, Dr. Robert Atkins, this whole kind of era of low carb and either higher protein or low protein kind of set came into play. Um, what ended up happening is over time people like to change it. People like to think that they have the next step to reinventing the wheel. Dr. Eric Westman even says himself, look, get your fat from your food. I mean, really, he is the ultimate longest running doctor when it comes to this stuff. He has been doing this longer than anybody else has. He's got the most research into this, and Dr. Stephen Feeney, Dr. Jeff Volek, and Dr. Eric Westman are all the 3 longest running in the low carb field, keto slash kind of whatever you want to call it. More protein is the Stephen Feeney and Jeff Volek way. More fat is the Dr. Eric Westman way. But they've all been in the field about the same time. Dr. Eric Westman has been running the ketogenic diet since like 1980, circa 1980 sometime. So there's no reason to be drinking that much dietary fat. To control your appetite first thing in the morning, sure, maybe a tablespoon of butter, a little bit of coconut oil or something like that. Some people like to add a little collagen. I can see that in the beginning. I don't want to get into my thoughts until the end, so please remind me if you stay here that long to touch base back on that. That's the science behind it. That's how it was created. That's the gist of why we do bulletproof coffee. So you can see that it was not originally created because for people's health. That's not why it was brought here. It was somebody that saw an opportunity because they seen another country doing it and then said, wait a second, if they could be outside for long periods of time only drinking butter in their yak butter in their coffee or their tea, well, why can't I coin that and bring it back to the United States and actually put out the bulletproof coffee diet and tailor it to the keto diet? and it just kind of slowly took off. Um, what does bulletproof coffee do for you? Appetite control. I mean, a lot of people talk about severe appetite control. They have one of those big old giant bulletproof coffees, 600 calorie coffees, and they feel like they don't even have to eat for 12 hours. And, you know, the general consensus is they think that's what's healthy for them because they're not eating for long periods of time. Now, I'm not going to judge nobody. Do what you do. But that is one of the main benefits of having bulletproof coffee is appetite control. Um, test. Test yourself when you're doing these things. If you're looking at your blood sugar, your ketone levels, if you follow, there's another channel, they're called Two Fit Docs. They're two doctors that follow the ketogenic diet, and they try to be very open, very honest, doing their own testing, their own graphing, and everything as they go along. They put a little bit more work in than most of these doctors do to show you what happens when they try things. They actually take different types of creamer, different types of sugar, different types of amounts of bulletproof coffee, and they try it, and they graph it, and they show you what ends up happening. I've watched a lot of their episodes on bulletproof coffee because everybody throws around bulletproof coffee in the keto community like it's going out of style. It's just, it's a thing. And it's abused, heavily abused. And you watch all these other YouTube channels and stuff like that where you'll see Stephanie goes to Paris on keto or something like that, or Stephanie Keto in Paris. And she's grabbing a cup of coffee, and I'm not exaggerating when I say this. I just made up that name anyway, but this is true based on a video that I was watching, and I actually said something to the girl because she's actually a nutritionist, and she's overweight, and she's been on the keto diet for like almost 4 years or something like that, and she's only lost 40 pounds, but she's still teaching it to other people, and I don't understand why people aren't picking up what this girl's doing. Hasn't changed in 4 years, so why are you following this? But she's dumping spoons of erythritol, Splenda, into her coffee, and she's squirting skinny syrups and stuff all over it, and just dumping heavy cream without even measuring it out. And I'm like, what are you doing? You've got 40,000 followers, and I'm struggling to get 2,000. And I do the research. I go to the science. I go back to it. I call these doctors up, or I message them. I pick their brain, or I bug them until they give me the answers. I'm talking to one of these doctors, Dave Feldman, Dr. Barry, Dr. John Lemansky, Paul Saladino. I've messaged Paul Saladino, Dr. Paul Saladino, like maybe a dozen times in the last 2 weeks, just talking about stuff in general to get to the bottom of things, because I want to give you guys that information coming from a professional, me, and doing the research. Like, how do you get 40,000 subscribers on just dumping creams in your coffee and spoons of sugar just over and over again? Like, this blows my mind. Test yourself, guys. On the Two Fit Docs channel, they go into very controlled, very measured ways of doing this. They say, okay, we did 1 teaspoon of stevia, and we did, they'll go stevia straight first. We'll just do some stevia in our black coffee, and then we'll test our ketone results. And they'll say, okay, a little bit of stevia didn't really mess with us too much. Like, we noticed that it didn't hamper anything, didn't really change the effect too much of ketone blood sugar levels. So stevias would be okay to put in your coffee. And then they might do something like allulose or something like that. And they'll notice, okay, my ketone levels did go down and my blood sugar did go up a little bit. They're testing themselves. They're being their own scientists when it comes to this. They're building their own data sheet for themselves based on their health and what affects them, which is like super smart to me. We should all be doing that, but we don't do that. We don't take the time for that because we convince ourselves that we've got so much other stuff going on in our life that we can't be our own critic because we don't have time for it. When a lot of you, if you could simply just step back for a second, look at your schedule and readjust just for 10-15 minutes a day, you do have time. I know I've used that excuse so many times, and then my dad look at me and we sit down, we're talking, and my dad's like, you really think you don't have time? If you just took that extra 15 or 20 minutes that you did your break at work every single day and spent another 10 or 15 minutes of taking care of a business matter or something each day instead of that, you would have time. It's just simply readjusting. And I say, you know what, you're right. And I used to make that excuse all the time. Now I don't make that excuse anymore. But they build their own data sheet. And when they had black coffee, They noticed their ketone levels in the morning went from like 1.0 to like 1.4 on just straight black coffee. But then when they would add like heavy whipping cream or MCT oil or something that you would think that would increase ketone production because of liquid dietary fat, or MCTs being medium chain triglycerides that are shuttled to the liver immediately for energy, you would think that ketone levels would go up. But that's not necessarily the case. Over the last year, I've seen several cases where people have used MCT oil and they say that there's a brain awakening effect, maybe because of C8, C10, or C12 compound. C6 is just too short of a chain, and it's almost a waste. It's almost a waste medium chain triglyceride. C8 and C10 are more common. C8, I think C8 is the one that's the more critical form of medium chain triglyceride. So that's why Brain Octane, they started Dave Asprey's brand. They've really honed in on putting the exact medium chain triglyceride in the MCT oil that you would get the most benefit out of. Thank you. I appreciate it. So when you look at this from a bigger picture, they didn't see that much of an increase off of the medium chain triglycerides that they thought. So what are we after here? We're after a ketone increase because we want more fuel for our body, we want more fuel for our brain, but we don't necessarily want a spillage of ketones to where our body can't use them, correct? So when you look at the bigger picture here, if I'm adding MCT oil in my coffee and I'm testing my ketones, but I don't see a ketone rise, what is the purpose of taking MCT oil if I'm not getting the extra ketone benefit to it? Maybe there's a therapeutic effect because you're drinking the medium chain triglycerides, but those medium chain triglycerides get converted into ketones anyway. So the end result is still ketones. So if I put ketones in my coffee, if I put medium chain triglycerides in my coffee, expecting a level of ketone increase, and they don't increase, and I do this for several days, why would I keep adding that to my coffee? Now I'm wasting money because my body is actually not utilizing them to increase ketone production anymore. So I see a lot of people dumping $20, $30, $40 bottles of MCT oil into their coffee, but they don't even know if it's really affecting them. They're not testing themselves. They're not being their own scientists. They're not actually looking into it to say, am I getting an increase out of this? Is this benefiting me? Nobody's doing this stuff. I can't say nobody, but I'm just speaking of the masses. But when I seen two fit docs do it, I was so appreciative of it because I was like, that's what I do. Thank you. Finally, a professional in front of the screen. I'm not a professional. A professional in front of the screen that's showing people you really need to be your own critic. You really need to see how these things affect you. If black coffee increases my ketone production by 0.4, 0.3, 0.5, 0.6, I've seen almost a point, 1 full point off just regular black coffee. That is healing power. The thermic effect inside the body raises. The caffeine absorption is not hampered by anything. The more things you add to your food, the more you're probably pulling away from how your body absorbs and digests things. So we want to put MCT oils, we want to put stevia, we want to put cream and stuff in there. But realize sometimes adding these things to your food is not doing you any more. You might actually have appetite control. You might actually experience these things in the beginning, appetite control. But what else are you doing it for? Are you just doing it for appetite, but you really don't care too much about your ketone production? Then fine, add your little bit of cream, add your little bit of butter, whatever it is that you want. Maybe you want to put a packet or two of real stevia, not no stevia in the raw stuff or whatever it may be, because that stuff is mixed with maltodextrin and sugar. Make sure you're getting pure stevia. The stevia with erythritol would be fine as well. And monitor yourself. But if you're doing it for the neurological effect, if you're doing it for the overall super healing, it's not just about appetite. You might think about eating a heavier meal before you go to bed at night, so you don't have to have so much fat in the morning when you wake up. You might think about actually doing one meal a day and eating a massive meal in a 2-hour window. Maybe you're cramming your breakfast, your lunch, and dinner all in one sitting. So when you wake up in the morning, You've got so much built up energy inside your body. Your liver's got so much stored energy it's ready to just dump for your use that you don't have a reason to have all that extra bulletproof coffee. The reason why we do bulletproof coffee, the main thing is appetite control. So when we look at it from an appetite control standpoint, what can I do to my body to make it to where when I wake up in the morning, I don't want to dump all that stuff into my coffee? How about this? You sit down and you figure out a good macro plan for a dinner. Just try it. You will thank me for this. You have a 2-hour window to eat. Let's just call it one meal a day, but we're going to give ourselves a 2-hour window to do it. You might fit 2 meals in that 2-hour window. That's okay. That's still considered your 2-hour eating window. You're going to have bacon. You're going to have your little salads and stuff like that if you want. You're going to have some buttered chicken with jalapenos under the skin. You're going to make yourself some fathead pizza and stuff. You're going to eat in that 2-hour window like you have never ate before. You're going to make sure you're full. So when you wake up in the morning, you don't need to dump all this other stuff in there. You've already got so much built up energy in your body overall, and all that healing and stuff that's happened overnight, all the extra growth hormone production and stuff that's happened overnight. When you wake up in the morning, your liver it's not dumping very low density lipoprotein. Your liver dumps VLDL in an emergency state. So if you eat at 6 o'clock and then you wake up in the morning and you're starving, you're probably already releasing VLDL in abundance, because it's trying to say, okay, protection mode, dump all this extra very low density lipoprotein. This is where we fail when we go in for our lab results as well. We don't make sure that we're full the night before we start our fasted window before we get our lab results, and what ends up happening. We go get our lab results done and our lipids are all over the place, and the doctor's like, oh, I want to put you on a statin. This applies to the same way to every single day. If you eat enough before you go to bed, when you wake up, your liver doesn't have a reason to start dumping all that VLDL. You're going to be satisfied when you get up, but make sure you eat enough. So when you get up, you don't have to have all that coffee and stuff in the morning. But that's here nor there. That's test yourself. Test your ketones, test your blood sugar, see how it affects you. Go that route, because it's very, very, very important that you get yourself to a point where you're your own critic, where you don't have to run to Dr. BREW, where you don't have to run to the keto group that you've been with for 3 years because you're still going there and running for every single question. I run some of those groups that you guys are in. Some of them you don't even know I created back in the day, and other people took the groups over and ran them for themselves. Some of those groups, I was like a little mole inside back in the beginning, helping people structure the groups and run them. I see what goes on. I know I'm silent in a lot of those groups, and I see people asking the same questions over and over and over and over and over again. And I just want to tell you guys, you're not stupid. You guys are very smart. You guys are very smart. But sometimes you feel alone when you have to answer all the questions yourself. Sometimes you have to look at yourself and say, am I really making the right choice right now? Do I really think that I can do this on my own? Yes, you can. You need to be your own critic. Joe Schmo on the group that eats 6 pounds of bacon per day but loses 6,000 pounds per day, probably not going to work for you. So taking his advice is probably not the best advice for you. Be your own critic. Be your own scientist. See how black coffee affects you. See how the creams affect you. See how the stevia affects you. Test yourself. Don't follow what everybody else does or what Dr. Barry does or Jimmy Moore does or I do just because we say it. Test yourself. Figure it out for yourself. That's the only way it can be done. Okay. Sorry, I went off on that for a while. I didn't want to go all there. So I wrote down some notes on black coffee. Black coffee with the ketone production can raise your neurological condition, like your health. It can really wake up your brain a little bit more, especially if you get a little bit more caffeine and stuff involved. I actually wrote right down here on the paper, fat in the coffee doesn't always equal more ketones. Test yourself. Filtered coffee versus unfiltered coffee. So filtered coffee gets rid of a lot of the impurities that are in coffee. So when I say filtered coffee, I'm talking about a papered fine filter coffee. There are some things in coffee that can increase cholesterol levels. In Dave Feldman's group, Lean Mass Hyper Responders, if you don't know who Dave Feldman is, you really need to check him out. He's like at the forefront of all the lipid stuff, cholesterol stuff in the ketogenic community, in the carnivore community. Dave Feldman is by far a superpower when it comes to knowledge on lipids, and I've actually learned the majority of my information from him. So a lot of people in his group will talk about, hey, look, I gave up coffee for 3 months. I went and got my labs done, and I noticed that my triglycerides are up or down. They're down. But then they'll add coffee back in for a couple months, and they'll go get their labs done, and they say, man, my triglycerides are up 40, 50 points. What's going on here? Coffee seems to be doing that to a lot of people that are testing lately. I've had people in my personal keto groups that I run, not very big, 46, 4,700 people, another one 3,000, another one 5, 600. Same thing. I went and got my labs done, and now I'm noticing that my triglycerides are up, and the only thing that I've changed is I've added more coffee in. Well, there are some things to coffee in general that do that. First of all, you're adding this dietary fat in there, which is going to raise serum cholesterol. You're going to get a cholesterol increase when you start adding in dietary fats of saturated sources, of course. I mean, that's just natural. It's going to happen. Is there a reason to be worried? No, not really. But the fact is, LDL will increase, total cholesterol will increase, triglycerides will increase of some extent. So it's just a matter of whether or not you're super worried about that, and whether or not you can engage yourself from a long line of testing yourself over and over again. Remnant cholesterol, triglycerides to HDL ratio, these types of things, and whether or not, how you feel, how you function. Are you a gym rat? Are you waking up on time every day? Is your communication and your relationships good with people? How do you feel overall? How are you functioning overall? And what are the rest of your lab results? We'll tell the story on exactly what's going on. So again, this comes down to being your own critic. Coffee can, and more than likely will, raise numbers. When we talk about filtered versus unfiltered, unfiltered coffee has a chemical in it called cafestol, and filtered coffee lowers that cafestol. If you look it up, it's CAFESTOL. And it's a diterpenoid molecule in coffee beans. And what is a diterpenoid? It's defined as being hydrocarbons and thus contain no heteroatoms. These are for you science geeks out there that want to listen to this. Heteroatoms are an atom in the ring of a cyclic compound other than a carbon atom. Any atom that is not carbon or hydrogen. Cafestol may be responsible or proposed for biological and pharmacological effects of coffee. Unfiltered coffee with cafestol, on the contrary, I looked up different stuff. I looked up the negative. That was the negative to it. Yes, it may raise your triglycerides. It may raise your LDL. It's going to raise your total overall if it raises those two. But I actually looked at the positive side as well. I'm not, like I said, I'm not going to give you just one negative or one side. I'm going to give you the positives as well. Increases of serum cholesterol, filter does not normally do this. So if you filter your coffee, normally you don't get the raise in cholesterol overall as you do with unfiltered coffee. But if you are an unfiltered coffee drinker, a percolator or something like that, if you don't really have a filter to your coffee, there are some positives to that as well. I found one study where they talked about a study in rats showed that anti-carcinogenic effects. Coffee had an anti-carcinogenic effect. It was an anti-carcinogenic. So that's a positive. I found also another study that talked about fruit flies study. Says that cafestol has shown neuropathy effects decreasing in model of Parkinson's disease through a study of fruit flies that ingested cafestol. So now we're talking about the neuropathic effect of Parkinson's being decreased by having unfiltered coffee. So there are pros and cons to everything that we do. This is why I go back to saying you can't just follow one bit of information. You're going to talk to Dr. Anthony Gustin or something like that, was doing a video with Dr. Anthony Gustin. He's a younger doctor. He hasn't been doing this that long. He hasn't even been a doctor that long compared to the other doctors, but he's still a doctor and he still needs to be respected for that. And he promotes keto. But he promotes this really high vegetable, really clean keto, no dirty, no processed, no nothing, and you have to run it like an angel. You cannot make mistakes or anything. And I get it. I get the fact that he's young and his approach is not where the other doctors are at yet. And he actually brought somebody on that was like a nutritionist or something like that, and they were calling like everything that we do dirty keto. And that was one of the things that was brought up, is the fact that there's no one way that you can do anything. Dr. Anthony Gustin promotes only doing clean keto, 100% balanced macros, tracking everything, blah blah blah. You can't make a mistake, or else you're gonna set a flame and you're gonna fall down to the underworld. But then there's the Dr. Berry way of looking at things, where he says, you know what? If you're eating hot dogs, just do the best that you can with the cleanest hot dogs. If you're eating conventional meat, just try to find the cleanest source that you can. There's no perfect way to do it, and your journey is different than everybody else's. So this is where our approaches start to become different. And this is where I want you to really engage from the standpoint of one doctor is not the same as the other doctor. And you also have to remember as well, I might hurt some feelings by saying this, but remember, all these doctors came from, yes, a standard American recommendation. They all made those faults. They all gave those bad recommendations back in the day. At some point, they had to start somewhere, and then they grew from that. So a lot of them transitioning from what they were to what they are now came from the same standpoint that we did. We thought we were doing something the right way to what we're doing now. And a lot of the information that they have learned is from studies and stuff that have been put out from Dr. Stephen Feeney, Dr. Jeff Volek, Dr. Eric Westman. A lot of these doctors from back in the 80s and stuff like that have been doing this a lot longer than them, that this is a branch of their information that they gathered. And then they start looking into little bits and pieces of other science and stuff like that, just like we do. So, in a sense, there's a lot of us that have actually been doing this a lot longer than these doctors have. But you have to take things with a grain of salt. Be your own critic. Be your own evaluator. Figure out how things affect you. Don't just listen to one person. I think a lot of people idolize a lot of the public figures that we have, a lot of the keto people and the carnivore people that we have, because they finally come forward and they've spoken out where other people did not have a breath to do that, or they were embarrassed to do it, or they didn't know how to get in front of a camera and do it. A lot of people that are more knowledgeable than some of them in many ways, that are professionals, don't know how to speak about it, or they just don't have the nerve to get up and say publicly, you know what, the standard American diet's crap, the medical recommendations are crap. So we do have some people that are speaking for us out there that are professionals. And by that right, they do deserve the respect. But at the same time, so many people idolize them and ask them for every single answer that they have. We have to wake up and realize they don't have the answers for all that stuff. They have the answers for a majority of the crowd, and they put the general basis out, and then you have to figure out from there where you need to go with it. So we live on the hopes of this person that we idolize to represent us, and it shouldn't be that way. We should look to them for information, maybe some inspiration and stuff like that, and then we should move on about our business. But when we have to go to somebody and say, oh, nope, Dr. So-and-so says this is the only way to do it. Well, no, Dave Asprey says I should have bulletproof coffee every single day, and I need to have this much, and this much. Some of you know that I follow, or that I ran into Stephanie Keto person. Granted, she does what she does, but there are a lot of people that are extreme when they make recommendations. Stephanie Keto person is some kind of health coach or something like that on YouTube. And I want to say this respectfully, but I don't want to at the same time, because I really want to be honest with you guys. When I watch her videos, I cringe. I cringe because her general recommendation to all women, all people that follow her, is you need to be eating 200 grams of fat minimally per day. When I hear that, it almost makes me want to throw up in my mouth. Do you know how many people cannot consume that much fat in one day? Do you know how many people I've had to fix because of those recommendations? Because people idolized her and followed those recommendations, but then came to me and said, I don't know what's going on. I just can't lose weight. I'm having 225 grams of fat per day. Well, quit freaking having 225 grams of fat per day. Where are you getting it out of? Well, a lot of it in my bulletproof coffee. I just can't consume it in my food, so I'm putting it in my coffee. Well, quit. Seriously. 2 months later, they're already back to losing weight. They've adjusted. They're feeling good. It's when people do stuff like that that damage it for everybody else because they think that's what has to be done. They think that because somebody has 100,000 followers, that's what has to be done because look how popular they are. That's not why people are subscribing to that channel. Women feel comfortable talking to her because she's another woman. Women feel comfortable talking to her because she's a very fit, lean, good-looking woman. She's got abs. She's always in like her sports bra and stuff like that. She's always just come back from the gym or going to the gym or on a bike. So people want to listen to somebody like that. But if you go back into the history of where she came from, she was never overweight. She always looked just as good as she does now. She just saw a niche in the field and she went with it. She probably done some healing along the way, don't get me wrong. But again, this is somebody else. Sorry. Somebody called me just now in the middle of this. But again, this is somebody that promotes only grass-fed meats. You have to have minimum 200 grams of fat per day or else you're not doing keto right. And I've actually called her out on it. I've actually called her out on it and told her to come debate me here because you don't understand the damage that you're doing. And I'm not talking bad about her. I'm just showing you the differences between Dr. Anthony Gustin. Everything's got to be perfect keto, no cheats, no nothing. You got to do it spot on, no process, no. Dr. Berry, understanding doctor, family doctor, knows that everybody can't make the right choices, perfect choices all the time. Just do the best you can. And then you go to Stephanie Keto Person, the YouTuber that is just a YouTuber. She just helps people heal through her ketogenic journey. You got to have 200 grams of fat minimum per day. It's got to be you can't have more than this much protein. This is where it all breaks down. We've got so many people out there reinventing all these different styles of ketos, all these different types of bulletproof coffee, all these different recommendations. You have to be careful. You have to figure out what you need, your journey, your way. Test your blood sugar from time to time. Test your ketones from time to time. Measure yourself more than you actually get on the scale. Hydrate to your satiety, not to a certain amount. Like there's a lot of these keto groups that say half your body weight in ounces of water. No, that is inaccurate. It's a light straw-colored urine, or hydrate to your satiety, to what makes you feel good. All this other stuff, throw that out the window. Go back to neutral, go back to simple, go back to whole foods, do the best you can, just like Dr. Berry says. Just like try to do a little bit of Dr. Anthony Gustin where you try to get the cleanest form if you can afford it and if it's in your budget. Try not to drink 600 calorie bulletproof coffees every single day. That ain't going to do you no benefit. Through the beginning in your adaptation phase, sure. But after 2 or 3 months of doing that, I would start tapering it off and eventually maybe come off of drinking your fat totally and actually get your fat attached to your protein sources just like Dr. Eric Westman says. But in the grand scheme of things, what you take away from this is exactly this. You need to worry about you. You need to worry about yourself. You need to worry about writing things down, figuring out what affects you, what doesn't affect you, what's causing immune reaction, what's causing inflammatory conditions, what's causing you to actually gain weight, lose weight, what works, what doesn't work. And these general recommendations that come from the keto groups and stuff like that are just general recommendations. Just take that stuff with a grain of salt and figure out what works for you. At the end of the day, that's that. That's it. I can't say any more other than that. You need to figure out what works. So I hope I've answered some of the questions on coffee. A cold brew coffee is simply the best coffee that you can actually drink. It does have more caffeine per serving, but because it's cold brewed, it doesn't have the acidic effect that other coffee does. You can find coffee from different parts of the world that when you do heat it up and brew it, it doesn't have as much acidity in its hot form, but a cold brew coffee simply has more caffeine and it has way less acidity. It's not as hard on your teeth, and it's not as hard on your stomach. So if you're gonna drink coffee and you can find a cold brew coffee that you enjoy, Starbucks used to have, I don't go there no more, it's too expensive, but Starbucks used to have a cold brew, coconut cold brew is what I used to stop by there and get in the morning. And it was just a coconut milk that didn't have no sugar, no nothing like that in it, and they would just put a little bit, I tell them just a splash of coconut milk in my cold brew coffee. And man, I loved that bitter bite. It had a different sensation that hot coffee had, and the caffeine level was great compared to hot coffee. I mean, it really made me feel good. So if you're going to get a coffee, get a cold brew coffee. I've tried that brand at the supermarket called Stock or whatever it is, STOK. It's all right. It's a pretty decent coffee, but I don't add nothing to my coffee. I don't put any of that other stuff in there. If I put anything in my coffee, I would probably put just some heavy cream without the carrageenan in it, if you can get it. If you just get regular heavy cream and that's it, that's probably all I would ever put in my coffee. About a teaspoon, maybe 2 teaspoons of heavy cream, and that's it. I wouldn't put any sugar. I wouldn't put any of that other stuff in there. If you can, try to get stevia. But outside of that, those syrups and all the other junk that people put in there, and then they're swirling whipped cream all over it and stuff like that. It's got to be a gourmet coffee every single day. I mean, you may as well just have a meal at that point. Something more nourishing. Anyway, that's it. That's all I got. If you got any questions, I'll wait here for about 30 seconds to see if somebody has questions. I'd be willing to talk about it. Yeah. What are you doing, chica? Just going to wait about 30 seconds and then... No questions. Okay, guys, I'm going to go ahead and jump off of here. I think it's been about 30 seconds. Thanks for hanging out with me as long as you have. And if you're just catching us here at the end, probably go back at the beginning. I covered a lot of stuff. I think it was a decent video. If you guys liked the video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't like the video and I sucked, then tell me I sucked. That's fine too. But I hope you have a blessed day. And if there's anything else you'd like for me to cover in the future, please give me a shout out, and I will make sure I cover that in the future. We got part 2 tomorrow coming up of Melanie Princess, aka Princess Ninja with Keto. She will be here. I'm gonna do the second part of her blood results. I'm gonna cover vitamins and stuff like that, and how to look at the lab panels and go over that. Yesterday we did the lipid profile. Tomorrow I'm going to look at the rest of it and just shed some light on exactly what's going on with the rest of your lab panel. A lot of people don't cover that, but I want to cover it. So again, thank you for being here. I'm going to go ahead and get off. I will spare you me running my mouth for another 20 seconds. So have a blessed day, guys. Thank you. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed. Thumbs up. Remember that always helps the YouTube.